At the time of this recording, we are 1 week out from Easter. And so next week we're going to talk about what happened on Easter. Easter is the main event for Jesus followers, and I'm really looking forward to what I get to share next week. Now, if Easter is the main event, today we're going to look at the prequel. What happened shortly before the main event, and specifically we're going to look at an incident that reveals a lot of the backstory for Easter. So if you've got a Bible, I invite you to join me in John chapter 13. We're going to look at the first 17 verses. The context for this incident that John talks about here in John 13, verses 1 to 3, is as follows. It's Thursday. You see that in verse 1a. And Jesus knows that the hour had come. In contrast to John 7:30, when it says that the hour had not come. The Pharisees tried to have him arrested, but they failed because it wasn't his time yet. And as I think about that, just a quick aside, I'm reminded that God is in complete control of the events and timing of the life of Jesus and my life, your life, the world around us. God is in complete control of all events and the timing. So Jesus knew that the time had come. He knew what was coming. He knew that he would soon leave this world and he was going to go to the Father. He knew that he would be betrayed by a friend sitting at dinner with him that night. He knew that he'll be the Passover lamb this year for the entire population and all humanity in all ages. He knew that he'd be slain. He knew that he will be judged by God the Father for the sins of humanity. And he knew that 3 days later he would rise from the dead, and that God the Father would then welcome him home and give him all authority. Imagine the emotions. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 3 says, who for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. So one of his emotions, I know, was joy. As he's in this moment, he knows the time has come. But there's also some dread. We read just shortly after this, he's there in the Garden of Gethsemane, and the sweat is pouring off him like great drops of blood. He is in anguish. There's dread. There's sadness, because he knows that his relationship with his disciples is about to change, and nearly all of them are going to flee in panic very, very soon. Just tremendous emotion, and he knows what's coming, and he knows that it's time. We learn more about the context there at the end of verse 1 and the beginning of verse 2. We see that he's having one last meal with his friends. And there in the second part of verse 2, we see that Satan has already prompted Judas to betray Jesus. And there at the beginning of verse 3, we see that Jesus knew that God the Father had put all things into his hand. In other words, God has already given Jesus authority over everything. And then we see at the end of verse 3 that Jesus knew that he'd come from God and he's returning to God. I think that's code for saying Jesus knew his core identity, that he is the beloved Son of God, that everything God the Father had said about him there at his baptism years earlier, this is my beloved Son, listen to him, is still true. And that his core identity as beloved Son of God will not be affected by the upcoming events, the betrayal, by the judgment that God is going to place on him. He is the beloved Son of God. That core identity is not at stake. And there's one last thing that's key to the context of the story that we're going to look at in just a moment, and that is this. No one had done sandal duty. Sandal duty. In those days, they went everywhere by foot, right? They walked everywhere, and so it was a dusty climate. And so their feet were dirty and dusty. And so when you came in, before you sat down for a meal, and remember they didn't sit at chairs, they kind of reclined. And so your feet were kind of stuck away from the table, but near other people. And so before you did that, before you had the meal, one of the first things you did was you got your feet cleaned. And if you were a person of any kind of means, you had a servant to do that. If you had servants of from multiple countries, then you would not let a Hebrew slave do that for you, because that was beneath them. Sandal duty was the worst of the duties in the household, because you were just dealing with people's filth and smelly feet and yuck. And so it was the lowest of the low, and consequently no one had done it. So Jesus is there, ready to enjoy this last meal with his disciples. He loves them, but he knows what's coming, and they're ready to eat, but no one has done sandal duty. And so we pick up the incident in verse 4. In verses 4 and 5, we read that Jesus got up from the meal, took off his outer robe, put a towel around his waist, got a basin of water, came in, went up to the first of his disciples, and Jesus did sandal duty. Something that none of them wanted to do, but everybody needed done. Something that they wouldn't do for another person because that was beneath them. Something that was beneath most slaves. Jesus got up from the meal and he did sandal duty. And then when he got to Peter, Peter objected, and that led to a short, strange conversation, verses 6 to 10. And then he finished sandal duty, returned to dinner, and asked them if they understood what had just happened. This is verse 12. When Jesus had washed their feet and put on his outer clothing, he reclined again and said to them, "Do you know what I've done for you?" That's an interesting question, and fortunately he didn't give them time to answer it. He answered it himself. I think they would answer, washed our feet? And that was true. Jesus had washed their feet, but he'd done so much more. And that's what I want to look at over these next few minutes with you, is what is that so much more that Jesus had done. And so we get to the explanation. I think there are two things that Jesus had done for them. One is clearly stated in the text. The other, I think we have to infer a bit. So let's talk about the one that we infer. I think what Jesus had done was a prequel to the main event. He did in the moment, or in those several minutes actually with his disciples, a prequel to what he was about to do the very next day. On Thursday, he did a prequel for what he's going to do on Friday. What was he going to do on Friday? The dirty job of cleaning them from their filth. On Friday, he was going to deal with the filth of their sin, my sin, your sin. On Friday, he was going to deal with their sin. He was going to do the dirty job of taking upon him their filth. It was going to be personal. It was going to be put on him. He was going to have to deal with their filth because they could not deal with it on their own. God looked at them, required a judgment, required justice because of the filth of sin, and Jesus is going to deal with that on Friday. And what is he doing on Thursday? A prequel. It's coming up to each man, and ever so gently and humbly, with a cloth around his waist and the little basin of water in front of him, washing their feet, dealing with the stinkiest part of their being, leaving them clean and ready to fellowship with one another. What did he do Friday? Same thing, only in a much more intense way. He went to the cross where he humbly took upon himself my sin, their sin, your sin. Dealt with the dirtiest, the stinkiest parts of our being and cleansed us, leaving us clean from our sin, clean from a guilty conscience, so that we are in a position where we can enjoy fellowship. We could sit around a meal with God. I think this is a prequel event. I think we get a hint of it in verses 6 to 11, that kind of strange conversation that I've mentioned that Jesus is having with Simon Peter. In verse 6, it says, he came to Simon Peter, who asked him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "What I'm doing you don't realize now, but afterward you will understand." Verse 8, "You'll never wash my feet," Peter said. Jesus replied, "If I don't wash you, you have no part with me." I think that's key there. If I don't wash you, if I don't deal with your filth, Peter, then you and I, we don't have any kind of relationship. You've got no part in me. We're not friends. If I don't wash you, you're still going to be dirty, Peter. And if you're still dirty, we can't be friends. Verse 9, Simon Peter said, "Well, Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." One who is bathed, Jesus told him, doesn't need to wash anything except his feet, but is completely clean. You are clean, but not all of you, for he knew who would betray him. This is why he said, not all of you are clean. They're all clean, or they soon will be, right? On Friday. Saturday, Sunday. By the time of the resurrection, they'll be clean. And so he says, you are clean. Well, of course, not all of them aren't clean. Who's not clean? Well, Judas isn't clean. Why? Because Judas is not going to put his trust in what Jesus is going to do for him. They didn't understand it yet, but they'd get it later. This was a prequel, but it was way more than a prequel. The text continues, John 13, verse 13. You call me teacher and Lord, and you are speaking rightly, since that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I've done for you. Truly, I tell you, a servant is not greater than his master, and a messenger is not greater than the one who sent him. More than a prequel, we got an example. Jesus washed their feet to give us a practical way to become like their Lord and teacher. An example of how to do that is to love by serving humbly. He loved them to the end. That was in verse 1, and now he is serving them at the end. He loved them by serving them humbly. And then Jesus added an incentive for being doers and not just hearers. Verse 17. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. According to Jesus, this is the way to the blessed life. To love by serving others. That's the way to the blessed life according to Jesus. Now, I feel like we need to handle an objection, because you might be thinking, and I got to admit, there are many times when I've been thinking this next thought, serving doesn't sound like the blessed life. It sounds like I get taken advantage of by other people and they have the blessed life, doesn't it? Doesn't it sound like that? Doesn't it maybe feel like that? That if I serve others, then they're blessed, but I'm not blessed by that. I was thinking of a video clip by Tim Hawkins where he talks about how when you go to get an airplane, they don't treat you really well. They divide you into classes, and so they start out with, now boarding our first class passengers, our business passengers. Tim kind of makes a big joke about that, and he says, okay, in other words, we love you, all of you who have done something with your life. You matter. You get to go on first, and then they proceed on with class 2, class 3, whatever, through all the way to economy. Or as Pastor Colton used to call it, cattle class at the back. Right? You get on last and you're sitting back there in these little cramped seats and you have no leg room. So let me ask you, would you feel blessed to hand over your first class ticket and go sit in the back in cattle class? Would you feel blessed if you could trade your first class ticket with somebody who had an economy ticket and you gave them your first class and you took their economy class ticket? Would you feel blessed if you served them in that way? If you say yes, that's awesome. I am so happy for you. You are farther along in your spiritual journey than I am. Perhaps there's something that we're not seeing, we're not understanding. Perhaps there are dots that still need to be connected. And that's what I hope to do over these next few minutes, is share with you what I think God is teaching me about how is it that this is the blessed life. But before I do that, I want us to note one other thing. Jesus, when he talks about washing each other's feet, Jesus is not advocating random acts of kindness. Those acts often result in blessing, that for sure, but he has something far bigger in mind than an occasional random act of kindness. He has something huge in mind, something that results in quiet confidence and the ability to do what most people are too afraid to do or more. Jesus is challenging them to put their faith in what he says about their core identity. And to find out from experience that their core identity, what God says about them, who they are at the core, that is real, that is awesome, and trusting in that. And finding out from experience that that really is there and it's real and it will support the way even of serving one another, that leads to something that is truly awesome and incredible. Something that if you were to have that, you would say, man, I have a blessed life. So let's look at it from what Jesus is saying. How do we live the blessed life? I think the first part of that answer is, number one, know who you are. Know your core identity. Know who you are. You see this in this story. Jesus knew who he was. If you and I want to live the blessed life, if we want to be able to do the things that Jesus did, we need to do the same. We need to know who we are. We need to know our core identity. What is our core identity? Well, there's three things that I'm going to hit on that I think are core to who we are. Number one, we are beloved by God. We are truly beloved by God. That's one reason why Jesus served you by dealing with your filth. It's one of the reasons why he continues to serve you. In fact, I would go so far as to give you this question to ponder. Is there anyone on the entire planet more loved or more served by God than you? No. You're beloved. As I thought about that this week, I thought about somebody I know who showers love on a few individuals. You might even say they have their favorites. And sometimes you can tell who those favorites are, you know. They really love those people. That's the way it is with you, and that's the way it is with me. Not so much that we're favorites, but we are truly, truly loved by God. We are beloved. And nothing that you are facing or face in the future can negatively impact God's love for you. And no negative circumstances or painful season is evidence that God has quit loving you. You are beloved. At the very core of your being, you are part of the beloved by God. But there's a second part of your core identity, and that's this. You are not God. You are loved by God, but you are not God. Therefore, you have no right to expect others to serve you. Jesus, who is God, didn't even do that, right? Verse 16, truly I tell you, a servant is not greater than his master, and a messenger is not greater than the one who sent him. Elsewhere we read that Jesus said, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. And I'm not greater than Jesus, so if he didn't expect others to serve him, then I can't be expecting others to serve him. God doesn't agree with that expectation that I have sometimes. You will serve me. God doesn't agree with that. My family doesn't agree with that. You don't agree with that. Nobody should agree with that. Think about how much freer would you be without that unrealistic expectation that people serve you. How much freer would you be if you could let that go, lay that down, die to that false expectation, that false belief? How much less frustration would be in your life? How much less anger, less conflict? So you are beloved of God, but you are not God. You are, part 3, a lover of God. Yeah, that's it. You are a lover of God. 1 John we read, right? We love him because he first loved us. You're a lover of God. Therefore, you want to follow God. And you want to follow Jesus. And where appropriate, you want to imitate Jesus. And if that's your desire, I think it's important that we know that this is who Jesus is. At his core, Jesus is one who serves. So this is your core identity. You're beloved. You're not God. You are a lover of God, and Jesus dealt with your filth, so now you're beloved, and you're a lover of God, right? Jesus has served you, and he continues to serve you. And with this core identity in mind, you're able to do what Jesus did. What did Jesus do? Humbly accept what God brings into your life. That's what he did. He humbly accepted what God had brought into his life. He knew it was time. There was a plan. He'd worked it out with God. And he knew that he was about to go through pain and agony and anguish beyond description, beyond belief. He was about to go through hell. And yet he humbly accepted. You know the story. In just a few hours there in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's going to say, Father, if possible, take this from me. But if not, I want your will to be done, not mine. It's your solid core identity, knowing that you truly are the beloved of God and that you are not God, that allows you to humbly accept what God brings into your life. That's what Jesus did, and that's what you and I can do as we put our confidence in what God says about us and our core identity. But the second thing that Jesus did that we can do is this: see the needs of others despite your own pain, or in Jesus' case, see the needs of others despite his impending doom, and then do what others are too afraid or too proud to do. Love them by serving them. And as a result, if we do this, right, we consciously think about who we are in Christ, beloved of God, lover of God, but not God. And so we're like, God, I believe this so much that I'm going to humbly accept what you're bringing into my life. And God, I believe this so much. I'm trusting in this, so I'm going to love other people by serving them, even though I'm in pain and all is not right in my world. As we do that, and God carries us along, it works, if you will. The result is greater confidence in the reality of our core, because we see that we put our trust in what God said about us, and God carried us along, and it worked. We were okay. We were more than okay. I mean, think about it. How would you come to have strong belief and confidence in your core identity? By acting on it, by trusting on it, and seeing that it holds up. Washing others' feet is acting on your belief. It's faith demonstrated by works, like what Pastor Joel talked about in the James series. It's genuine faith being proven through works, and that brings a blessing. We could say it this way: your core identity enables you to live the blessed life. Isn't that awesome? Your core identity enables you to live the blessed life. So how do you live the blessed life? Well, number one, right? You know who you are. You know your core identity. And number two, you love by serving. And you do it like Jesus did. You meet real needs. And you make this more of a lifestyle than just some random acts of kindness. I want to return to that question I asked a couple minutes ago. If you're a Jesus follower, is anyone on the planet more loved and served by God than you? Man, let that sink in. You're clean. Because of what Jesus did on Friday, you're clean. You're beloved. You are brought into a relationship with God because you're clean and you're loved. You're welcome to the table. You're invited to fellowship with the Trinity. God the Father, the Holy Spirit, Jesus, all want you there. You are beloved. You're not God, and you know you're not God. But man, do you love God. And therefore, because all of that is true, you can do what Jesus did. You can humbly accept what God brings into your life, and you can love by serving. And as you do, you'll experience amazing blessings. God's love, peace, and freedom.